Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for February 25th, 2026. Today is National Chocolate Covered Nut Day, which is great because I am nuts about you. Pause for laughter. Today we're going to be covering the furnishing of the tabernacle, Jesus' warning about the leaven of the Pharisees, and Proverbs about the wisdom of ants. Interestingly enough, well, let's jump right into it. Now, diving into the Old Testament reading, yesterday we saw the Israelites give a such overwhelming, generous gift that Moses had to tell them to stop bringing goods to the tabernacle. And today we see the master craftsman Bezalel get to work using those gifts to build the sacred furniture for the tabernacle. Now, first, Bezalel constructs the most important item, the Ark of the Covenant. This is a chest made of acacia wood overlaid completely with pure gold. It's not overly large, it's about 4 feet long, but the significance of it is immense. Inside are the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. That's where those tablets will live. In the famous movie Indiana Jones, it's the same box that they open and all of the people's faces fall off. Well, that's the box we're talking about here. Now, in this story, nobody's face falls off, but anyways, we can dream. On the top of the ark is a gold lid known as the mercy seat. The Hebrew word for mercy seat is kapareth. This word comes from the verb meaning to cover or to atone. This is the spot where God's presence will dwell, the very throne of God on earth, if you will. From each end of the mercy seat, you'll see golden cherubim are hammered out. Their wings are stretched over the lid, guarding the holy place. Now, a question you might have here is, why so much detail and repetition about this tabernacle furniture? We got the blueprints of the tabernacle back in Exodus 25, and now we're getting the construction report. And I know that repetition when reading through scripture can seem kind of boring and repetitive. I guess repetition would be repetitive, that's what that word means. The reason for it, though, is that in ancient Near Eastern writing, when you repeated words, it displayed the significance of that text. It's similar to when Jesus would say, "And again I say," and he would say the same thing over again. And a similar thing is happening here. By repeating the same thing over again, we're understanding the significance of what God is trying to say here. Next, Bezalel builds a table of showbread and a golden lampstand called the menorah. He then constructs the altar of incense, also made out of acacia wood with gold, where fragrance of incense would be burned, symbolizing the prayer of the people rising to God. And finally, in chapter 38, the massive bronze altar for sacrifices is built, along with the bronze basin where the priests would wash. And the chapter ends with a detailed inventory of all the precious metals used, like gold, silver, and bronze, reminding us again of the incredible spirit led generosity of the people. All right, now jumping into the New Testament, last time Jesus fed the 4,000 and then had a tense encounter with the Pharisees who demanded a sign. Today, the disciples have forgotten to bring bread, and Jesus uses the opportunity for a crucial teaching. So, picking up in the reading here, as they cross the lake, this is the Lake Gennesaret, which is also the Sea of Galilee, Jesus warns his disciples to watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees and that of Herod. The disciples, however, are completely fixated on the fact that they have lack of bread, and they think Jesus is scolding them for not bringing lunch. And Jesus is frustrated with his disciples at this point, and he has to spell it out for them. He's not talking about physical bread. He is using leaven, or yeast, as a metaphor. In the Bible, leaven almost always symbolizes a corrupting influence that spreads silently and pervasively. The Greek word used here is zyme, spelled Z-Y-M-E, and represents a toxic teaching and hypocrisy of the Pharisees and the worldly political power seeking of Herod. So really it's just toxic teaching that spreads. That's why he uses yeast as a metaphor. Then Jesus heals a blind man in Bethsaida, a process that actually happens in 2 stages. First, the man sees people like walking trees, which is kind of funny, reminds me of Lord of the Rings, and then his sight is fully restored. This 2 stage miracle serves as a living parable for the disciples, whose spiritual sight is also coming into focus gradually. There's a connection there. This leads to the climax of the chapter. Near Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they give Jesus the popular answers. Some say that he's John the Baptist, some say that he is Elijah or one of the prophets. And then he asks them directly, "But what about you? Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, here in a moment of divine revelation, declares that you are the Messiah. And right here is one of the turning points of Mark's gospel. But soon after Peter makes this great confession, Jesus begins to teach them that the Messiah must suffer, be rejected, and be killed. Peter is horrified by this news and he rebukes Jesus. And Jesus' response is swift and stunning. He says, "Get behind me, Satan," calling Peter Satan. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." All right, well, that was a very interesting interaction that Jesus had with Peter. First, he says, "You are the Messiah," this awesome revelation. But then, right afterwards, he doesn't want Jesus to suffer, and then Jesus rebukes him and calls him Satan. Talk about high highs and low lows. That would literally be like going to work and making the biggest and best sale of your entire career, followed immediately by the world's worst performance review. I mean, talk about roller coaster there for Peter. Feel a little bad for him, but it's here in the scripture and we can all learn from it. Now, moving on, a question you might have here, and this is when Jesus was talking about his suffering. Jesus said, "You need to take up your cross and follow me." Well, if you're following the timeline here, that's a little bit interesting. Now, for all of us here, we can kind of understand what he means by taking up your cross and following him. Jesus had to die on a cross, and we need to pick up our cross in the same way that Jesus picked up his cross and was obedient to God. We need to pick up our own symbolic cross and be obedient to God. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But Jesus here is talking about the cross, but he hasn't died on the cross yet. So, how can Jesus be using this as a metaphor when the cross metaphor hasn't become mainstream yet? Because he hasn't died on the cross yet. However, people who listened to Jesus back then would have totally understood the analogy that he was using. As a matter of fact, people back then would have taken this as an even more severe and more extreme analogy than what we tend to accept today. People understood crucifixion back then, and all the Jews who lived in the first century were under Roman authority. And the cross was used as a symbol that Rome used to suppress the Israelites. Meaning, if you step out of line, if you don't do what we want you to do, this is your punishment, the cross. And it kind of loomed over them. And Jesus is making a very distinct statement here. He's saying, to follow me is to be willing to go to death. It's to be willing to go against the grain of this world. It's an extreme statement. If you want to be worthy of me, if you want to follow me, you need to be willing to suffer whatever consequence. Following me is not a luxury. It's not something that you do as like a hobby. It's something you need to devote your life to. That's still the case today, and it was definitely the case back when Jesus spoke these words. All right, now we finish up today in the book of Proverbs, and Proverbs was written by King Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived. And this was a collection of wisdom books for his son. Now, today's Proverbs opens up with a strong warning against co-signing a loan for somebody else. There's a little bit of an odd teaching here, but he says that co-signing a loan is something you should totally avoid. And if you do this, you should do everything that you can to get out of it. And then Proverbs shifts to a lesson about laziness, pointing to the ant as a model of wisdom and diligence. The ant has no boss and no manager, yet it works hard all summer storing up food for the future. The sluggard, which is one of my favorite Bible words, the sluggard, by contrast, loves sleep and procrastination. And the Proverbs mocks him and says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. We need to not be sluggards. That's what the Proverbs is saying here. All right, this show is brought to you today by Covenant Security Equipment, which is a Christian-owned company that partners with building contractors who build with safety in mind. They sell bullet-resistant windows and secure transaction systems and drive-through installations and much, much more. Go to covenantsecurityequipment.com to learn more. And also, don't forget to pick up a copy of the Learn the Bible in a Year workbook. I did write this book for you, and it has additional questions and fun facts about our daily readings. The digital version is 100% for free. You can also pick up the paperback version, which is the version that I prefer. The link to both of those books are in the show notes, so go and check that out. What was your main takeaway from today? My main takeaway was Jesus' teaching to his disciples about the yeast of the Pharisees. The Pharisees had all types of teaching, and their teaching had become corrupt. And what Jesus is explaining to all of us is that a little bit of corruption can spread like a tumor, it can spread like yeast in bread. So that makes me wonder in my own life, what am I allowing into my life that maybe doesn't seem that bad, maybe it seems kind of harmless? What are those small things that can spread in my heart? I'll give you an example of my own personal life. I really love stand-up comedy. I love it. I did stand-up comedy when I was in college, and I really, really enjoyed the art, the craft, the whole deal. And I like to listen to stand-up comedy. Now, for those of you who listen to comedy, kind of like I do, you'll know that most comedy talks about some pretty raunchy things. Things that are not what I would say glorifying to the Lord. It's very easy for me to go, well, it's just a little bit. It's not like, I do this podcast, I read my Bible every day, just a little bit of comedy, a little bit of raunchy talk. It's not going to be that big a deal. But what Jesus is teaching us here is that that little tiny bit of poison, that little tiny bit of teaching, that little tiny bit of yeast, we need to be careful because that can spread throughout the entire loaf. And that type of poison can spread throughout my entire life. So, with things that I like that maybe aren't glorifying to the Lord, I need to be really careful to make sure that those things are not spreading throughout my life like yeast. How's that for an example? Alrighty, well, that is the podcast episode for today, and I will see all of you cool cats again here tomorrow.